Hello and welcome back to the Pluviophile Papers. Today we are going to be learning about Mary Sidney Herbert. Who was Mary Sidney Herbert? Mary Sidney Herbert lived from 1561 to 1621, and she was part of the so-called Sidney Circle, a literary network based in Kent. And most famous was her brother Philip. And very annoyingly, when you search Mary Sidney up, it comes up as Mary Sidney Herbert, brother of Philip Sidney. So her significance is attributed to the fact that she is Philip's sister. So Philip Sidney wrote Astrophil and Stella, which was printed in 1591. This is a sonnet sequence which was inspired by Petrarch and was incredibly influential, but his most famous work was Arcadia. And the full title of that is The Countess of Pembroke's Arcadia. Who is the Countess of Pembroke? Well, that is Mary Sidney Herbert. So this is a piece that Philip Sidney wrote for his sister Mary. Philip and Mary's niece, Mary Roth, would also go on to write Urania, so she wrote her own very significant piece of writing. But it wasn't just people in the family who were writers, because Edward Spencer, who of course wrote the very famous Faerie Queene, also wrote a piece called The Shepherd's Calendar, which he dedicated to Philip Sidney. So here on the title page you can see it is entitled To the Noble and Virtuous Gentleman Most Worthy of All Titles, both of Learning and Chivalry, M. Philip Sidney. Existing within this literary network, Mary Sidney also wrote. So Mary Sidney Herbert translated Antonius by Robert Garnier from French into English, and Antonius was the first case of Cleopatra ever appearing on the English stage. So this was a very significant piece of writing. Now, older scholarship has commented on how faithful, on how accurate Mary's translation is to Garnier. The fact that she's doing this very exact translation, which is incredibly faithful to the original text. However, more recent scholarship has argued with this and said, actually, she is showing immense creativity when she does this translation. But it's perhaps best shown through Bell and Cotigny's edition of Antonius, which has very detailed footnotes showing how the translation differs from the original French text. They argue that while these creative choices are granular and very specific, as opposed to huge plot-based things, they still are there. And when she's writing this piece, she is showing creativity and innovation, and she's providing an opinion. So what is the play Antonius by Garnier? Now, Cleopatra as a figure has historically and continues to be sexualized, and her death is often framed as something which is just and which needs to happen and which is the result of her own wrongdoing. But Garnier's play Antonius is much more sympathetic to Cleopatra. So Lauenstein looks at how Cleopatra is actually incredibly eloquent, and she argues that in Mary Sidney Herbert's translation, she is kind of asserting and showing that women do have political agency and they can have a political voice, and she's showing this through her translation. So as a character, Cleopatra is more pious, she's more good, and we kind of see this in the very first time that she speaks, which I'm going to read to you now. That I have thee betrayed, dear Anthony, my life, my soul, my son. I have such thought, that I have thee betrayed, my lord, my king, that I would break my vowed faith to thee, leave thee, deceive thee, yield thee to the rage of mighty foe. I ever had that heart. Rather sharp lightning lighten on my head, rather may I to deepest mischief fall, rather the opened earth devour me, rather fierce tigers feed them on my flesh, rather, oh rather, let our Nilus send to swallow me quick some weeping crocodile. And didst thou then suppose my royal heart had hatched thee to ensnare a faithless love? And changing mind as fortune changed cheer, I would weak thee to win the stronger. Loose, O wretch, O Cato, O too cruel hap, that did I not sufficiently sustain, losing my realm, losing my liberty, my tender of spring, and the joyful light of beamy sun, and yet losing more, thee, Anthony, my care, if I lose not what yet remained. Thy love, alas, thy love, more dear than sceptre, children, freedom, light. So aside from being so passionate, so empathetic, so filled with kind of woe and pity and sadness, this piece is it's putting kind of souls as opposed to bodies at the very heart of their relationship. So for example, this line where she says, rather fierce tigers feed them on my flesh, it takes the focus away from the body. She doesn't mind about what happens to her body. What she cares about is that her and Anthony get to remain together kind of perpetually as souls. So that second line where she speaks of Anthony as my life, my soul, my son, instead of as a body. And as I say, Cleopatra is often sexualized. So for her to take this focus away from the body and focus on the soul is actually quite significant. Bell and Cotigny's also claim that her translation is different from Garnier's because she is made the tragic hero of the play, and they argue that very subtly Mary Sidney Herbert positions Cleopatra as the character who is forbearing the most, who we're really encouraged to pity her, and even in that like opening scene, we do pity her. We feel her love, we feel her pain at the thought of losing Anthony, and they argue that is different from Garnier. So she is showing this creative license, and so although early critics say that she is very faithful to Garnier, actually when we look at it on a granular level, when we look at the language, when we look at the level of empathy within Cleopatra's words, we see that this actually isn't true, and that while she's following the plot which Garnier provides, actually her writing speaks to a different sort of Cleopatra that we're supposed to connect with on a deeper level. My absolute favourite of like the granular differences in translation is how she translates half dead, which is what the exact French translation would have been from Garnier, to life dead. So I'm going to read you the passage here, just to kind of put it in context. Reference to, this is just as Anthony has died. But still with weakness back his body fell, the miserable lady with moist eyes, with hair which careless on her forehead hung, with breast which blows had bloodily benumbed, with stooping head and body downward bent, enlaced her in the cord, and with all force this life-dead man courageously upraised, the blood with pain into her face did flow, her sinews stiff, herself did breathless grow, the people which beneath in flocks beheld, assisted her with gesture, speech, desire, cried and encouraged her, and in their souls did sweat and labour no whit less than she, who never tired in labour, held so long, helped by her woman and her constant heart, that Antony was drawn into the tomb. And what's interesting is Antony is here called life dead, but actually from the French, the exact translation would be half dead. And there's a big difference there, just poetically. Like if you listen to that word, like half dead versus life dead, they are very, very different things. Life dead implies that his soul is still alive, but that his body is dead. So even though he's a life dead man, even though he's biologically deceased, it doesn't mean that he is, that kind of like his soul is dead to Cleopatra's. There's kind of still like this sense that they are connected and that they are together as one, even though he's dead in life, which speaks to the same like connection of souls that we were talking about before. I think that's especially the case too, because the rest of that passage is really quite graphic and focused on the body, with things like, you know, the hair, the breast, the body downward bent, sinews stiff, blood with pain. Like these are very graphic, vivid images, which tie Cleopatra and Antony to their bodies, but that line, life dead, implies that they are still connected, which I think is very powerful. It's very subtle, but it's very powerful. So that is Antonius, which I would highly recommend you giving a go. I will leave a link to her translation down below if you want to have a look. It's on Project Gutenberg, so it's completely free. But I also wanted to tell you about this, which she did. It's another translation. These are her translations of the Psalms, which she did with her brother Philip. And these are actually my favourite pieces of Mary Sidney Herbert's writing. So Mary and Philip started translating these together. However, Philip died before they could finish, and so Mary then translated the rest. The Psalms are beautifully tender, they are introspective, and they are filled with emotion. I think it's really interesting also comparing her translations to the translations in the King James Version of the Bible, because the penitential Psalms, while obviously the sentiment is the same in both, the King James Version kind of states and tells of anguish, of grief. However, these translations show that through the language itself in just the most beautiful way. I will give you some examples. Like we see pain expressed through the language. So she translates, so for example, in the King James Version, in Psalm 32, it says, transgression is forgiven, which is quite simple as a phrase. However, when Mary and Philip translate the psalm from the Latin, instead they write, blessed to he whose filthy stain the Lord with pardon doth make clean. It's the same sentiment of transgression is forgiven. You will be forgiven if you do something wrong. But how beautiful is that? Like the language of blessed to he whose filthy stain. Like we start with blessed. Even before we know what has happened, we know that this person is blessed. Blessed to he whose filthy stain, not just stain, filthy stain. It's much more evocative. The Lord with pardon doth make clean. I think it's interesting too, having stain and clean in rhyming parallel, because we actually see the stain being replaced by the clean in the next line along. My absolute favourite translation, though, which I will read to you, it's marked in here because I love it so much. This is her translation of Psalm 130. From depth of grief, where drowned I lie, Lord, for relief to thee I cry, my earnest, vehement crying, praying, grant quick, attentive hearing, weighing. O Lord, if thou offences mark, who shall not bow to bear the cark? But with thy justice mercy dwelleth, and make thy worship most excelleth. Yea, makes my soul on thee, my Lord, dependeth whole and on thy word. Though sore with blot of sin defaced, yet surely hope hath firmly placed. Another one I really like is, this is from Psalm 102. O Lord, my praying hear. Lord, let my cry come to thine ear. Hide not thy face away, but haste and answer me in this my most miserable day, wherein I pray and cry to thee. My days as smoke are past, my bones as flaming fuel waste, mown down in me, alas, with scythe of sharpest pain. My heart is withered like the wounded grass, my stomach doth all food disdain. So lean my woes me leave, that to my flesh my bones do cleave, and so I bray and howl, as used to howl and bray, the lonely pelican and desert owl, like whom I languish long the day. I languish so the day, the night in watch I waste away, right as the sparrow sits, bereft of spouse or son, which irked alone with dolour's deadly fits, to company will not be won. As day to day succeeds, so shame on shame to me proceeds. From then that do me hate, who of my wrack so boast, that wishing ill they wish but my estate, yet think they wish of ills the most. This is quite a long psalm, so that's all I'll read to you of that one, but that is probably the most heart-wrenching of the psalms, I thought. If you do read these psalms as well, I do just have to recommend one academic paper on them, because it's one of my favourite academic papers. I love the argument in it so much. It's so interesting, and I would just recommend it if you're at all interested in Mary Sidney Herbert. So the piece is called Mary Sidney's Embroidered Psalms, and it's by Michelle Ochereau. And the piece basically argues that the actual form and structure of the psalms resembles pieces of embroidery, and the way that they are structured kind of links to particular stitches that you would have in embroidery. It's such an interesting and innovative and exciting way of reading this, and it links more broadly to the connection of pens and writing and needlework, which has been explored by the critic Susan Fry. Mary Sidney Herbert's work is beautiful, and I have linked some resources below, like this edition, printed book edition of both the Psalter and Antonius, if you would like to read a critical edition, but also I will link the free Gutenberg resources if you want to read them online for free. I'm hoping that you learnt something new today, that you learnt about the wonderful Mary Sidney Herbert if you didn't know about her before, and I will see you tomorrow with another educational video. I'm so excited about this channel, honestly, and just having a space to share literary history and share things about books and literary history, because I find it so fascinating, and I don't tend to, and I wouldn't post something like this on my main YouTube. So yeah, I'm really excited about this channel, and if there are any videos you would like to see, if there's anything in the kind of scope of literary history that you want to learn about, then do just let me know. But thank you for watching, and I hope that you have a wonderful day.